Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this month's Backyard Dairy Insight. This online seminar series is brought to you by the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension, and we're glad to have you with us today. As a reminder, we meet on the third Tuesday of every month to bring you the latest research-based information for dairy producers, employees, managers, and agricultural professionals. Our topics cover milk quality, animal welfare, breeding and genetics, automation, nutrition, and more. And always with a practical focus and real-world application for today's dairy farms. My name is Carolina Pinzon. I'm the bilingual dairy outreach specialist, and I'll be your moderator today. So before we begin, just a quick note on how today's session will run. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to send in questions or comments at any time. We'll gather them and address as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Also, this session is recorded, and I will send out the link within a week so you can rewatch it or share it with your teams. Also, you can find all the recordings from past webinars on our website. So let's go to our next slide. And today's webinar is titled Voices from Across Wisconsin, Workplace Dynamics and Herd Health. So we will explore perspective from dairy managers, employees, and veterinarians across the state, and how their experiences shape not only farm efficiency, but also the health and well-being of cattle. I'm excited to welcome today Dr. Laura Solano. Dr. Solano earned her veterinary degree in Costa Rica and completed her PhD at the University of Calgary, where she developed expertise in hoof health and cow comfort. She's now an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Veterinary Medicine, and her work blends research and outreach, focusing on workplace dynamics. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Solano. Bienvenida, Laura.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. So yes, thank you all for being here. We're gonna start off today talking a little bit. Let me see if this if this PowerPoint kind of works. Yeah, okay, I think that you should be seeing now the new slide. So I'm going to be talking today about voices from across Wisconsin, workplace dynamics, and herd health. And I'm going to guide you a little bit through what we know so far from this area. I'm going to jump into a study that we did, and that's the aim of this conversation here today, to talk about our findings and then next steps. So Carolina kindly introduced myself, but just as a reminder, and I always kind of like to show off my beautiful country where I'm from. I'm from Costa Rica. I moved from Costa Rica some time ago, but that's where I did my veterinary degree. The picture from the bottom right is our dairy farm back home. It's a pasture-based system, so very different from what we get to see here. But yeah, we milk cows at about 8,800 feet of elevation, so it's quite a different landscape. And what you see in there, all those clouds is the city. So basically, yeah, very, very high elevation, and it looks kind of like a romantic, beautiful green space for cows to pasture. But you should see that after a storm, hurricanes, and heavy rain, it doesn't look that pretty. So that romantic pasture-based system that people has in their mind sometimes doesn't look that good either. So in 2011, I left Costa Rica and I went to Canada to start my PhD. And then 2 years ago in 2024, well, I stayed in Canada for my PhD, and then I stayed working as a consultant for about 7 years after my PhD. And then about 2 years ago, I came to the University of Wisconsin as an assistant professor. And as far as my background, I've been, my area close to my heart has been hoof health, all things hoof health, cow comfort, lameness, hoof lesions, hoof trimming, all of that. That was my PhD and consultation across Canada, US, and Latin America as well when I was a consultant, and fascinated about that for sure. But when I moved to the US and considering the different work, labor, and what drives farms in the US being so different to Canada, to Costa Rica, to everywhere that I've been, I really got interested in the people side of things. And being Latina myself and being from a dairy background as well, and having been working with our people back home since I was a little girl, really, that's been also close to my heart. So right now, I'm shifting a little bit. I continue working with lameness on automated lameness technology systems and going on farms and working with the hoof trim teams as well. But a little bit of what I do as well not a little bit, a lot of what I do is starting all of this research on the people side of things. And how can we better support the human element of dairy farming? Through workplace dynamics, through environment, through workforce development, and how we can improve cows' health and well-being and the overall efficiency of cows. Of the farm operation. So just as a very quick background information here, you all know this, but assuming that there may be some people that is not from the US, we've had a huge shift in the dairy industry, and that has really pose a little bit of the theme for what we are going to be talking today. We have back in the day, not even back in the day that much, 25 years ago, we still had a lot of small farms, that beautiful red barns when you drive across Wisconsin, about 18,000 farms that we had, mostly family run. And in 2025, the numbers dropped to 5,300 dairy farms. So that's almost 2 out of 3 farms that have consolidated and have disappeared or turned into different extensions of other farms. But basically, we're producing the same amount of milk, quantity of milk. But what this means really when we talk about these big numbers and these big operations as well is that there has been a huge shift of the organizational structure, the herd size, of course, the farm size, of course, but the organizational structure has gone from kind of like a horizontal, flat organization where there was communication from employee to manager directly to a more vertical organization where we have different communication and more formal communication pathways. So that has had a big impact on what labor means in our dairy farms. And we've come across really different cultural backgrounds in these organizational structures. We have that in the US, about 50% of the dairy labor is foreign born, and only in Wisconsin, 70% is foreign born. And these are conservative estimates, I would say. So with that, there's been a big shift of culture, of language, of organizational structure. We now have dairy teams that are multilingual, multicultural, that speak several languages, and not everybody speaks the same language under the same roof. So that has added a layer of complexity. We have obviously Spanish as one of the main languages, but also a lot of the Spanish speakers, Spanish is the second language. Some of them have Aboriginal languages as the first language as well. We have English, we have Portuguese, we have Mayan, we have Nahuatl. So it's quite a bit of a combination. And on top of that, we have the different variations across the same Latin American countries and the same Spanish. We have, for example, that I could call farm, finca, granja, tambo. We have different words for that. We have for calf, we have 3-4 different words. So it does add a layer of complexity for English speakers when they are trying to learn the language and communicate. And on top of that, we have these variations. So also just a side note, because I'm always asked about different Spanishes, and I just want to make the note here that Spanish is the same language. It sounds obvious, but it is not a different language. It's not that we have different languages. It's the same Spanish, but just take it as American English, Canadian English, English from the UK, from Ireland, from South Africa, from New Zealand, you know. So it's just different lexicons that we use and different words for the same thing, but that does add a layer of complexity in an already complex multicultural and multilingual system. So with that, I just want to introduce, this is really what gave the backbone of a lot of the things that are coming up for my research plan and the lab that we're planning here at the UW-Madison at the vet school. And what we have so far, it's been taking me a while on trying to capture everything that has been done in the US. I think that what we know so far is what I mentioned, and there is a lot of demographical reports, surveys, field knowledge, so many people out there really trying to improve workplace and trying to understand all of these different dynamics, services, like lots of training, UW Extension and a lot of extension resources from land grant universities have done amazing jobs, and those are the ones that have the most resources as far as what we know. But what we do not know, or what remains unknown, is a lot of the research behind it, scientific evidence for what it is behind all of these layers of complexity, and specifically how the dairy industry, that needs and the specific needs and challenges that the dairy industry has for Wisconsin. Also, like how interactions between workers, cows, and farm environments shape the dairy systems. And with that, how to quantify the impact that has on the operational efficiency of the farm. And another unknown really is the evidence to design feasible workplace interventions. So in the same way that we as vets, as veterinarians, we go on farm and we troubleshoot a lameness issue, we troubleshoot a transition issue, we don't have that same information to troubleshoot and to address a workplace challenge that is affecting cow health and cow well-being. So that's some of the things that we're going to be talking today. The research is so limited to the dairy industry in all of this area that I'm also working with the School of Business and with economists as well to better understand and to really share these ideas. That trucker industry has done a lot of work on this, nurses, there is so many industries that really is very much a way that we can translate all of this knowledge. But I believe that after these 2 years of trying to understand what's in the US and how specific this US dairy system is compared to the rest of the world, we are lacking a lot of research evidence to go ahead and try to better understand this. So the first topic that I'm going to be talking about, and the main focus of this presentation, is on this first unknown, which is the dairy industry specific needs and challenges. Lately, in the past 5 years of my career, I really came to appreciate the value of mixing quantitative research evidence and studies with qualitative research evidence. So what that means is that normally we would go on farm, we collect a lot of information, numbers, cow observations, get the software information, mortalities, everything that you want. We draw associations, we draw causalities, we design all of these research studies as interventions or case control studies, all of this part. And that is numbers, that is statistical p-values, statistical significance, right? And that I've been trained as an epidemiologist, as a veterinarian epidemiologist. So that's that type of research that I'm very comfortable with. But I started thinking, okay, we have all of these areas of knowledge, for example, in lameness, that we know how to address lameness, and what changes we need, and what are the main risk factors, and what are the main causes of lameness, but things are not being done on farm. They're not being implemented. So we know the how, we know the what, but we don't know the why they're not being implemented. So that's when we turn to qualitative research to ask people for their perspectives and their ideas on what from their end are barriers, are challenges, are facilitators to implement changes or to not implement changes. So that's the mix that I really appreciate. And what do we do with that information? Because sometimes as researchers, we just go and do what we want and what we think is best for the cow and best for the farmer and what we're passionate about. But we sometimes forget about really listening to the end user, and the end user being the veterinarians, the end user being the farmers or the employees or the industry itself. So this is like the backbone of what's coming next. So I'll just talk about that very specific industry specific needs and challenges that the research I did compiles. So what I did last year was that I went to several veterinary clinics and several farms, and I talked to people. I run focus groups, and a focus group is just sitting down. This is qualitative research. Focus group is just sitting down on a table with a conversation, and you have sort of a organized, structured questions, but you don't follow that to the dot. It's just an organic conversation that you kind of jump from one topic to the other and connect the dots and let people speak. That's what it is about, listening to what people has to say. So I run about 17 focus groups that are discussion groups really across Wisconsin with 7 veterinary clinics. That was 38 veterinarians and some of the technicians too that participated. 4 focus groups that involved about 10 dairy farms and 32 people were involved. No, 15 dairy farms and about 32 people were involved with that. And other focus groups or other discussions, I went to those farms that participated, a lot of those farms that participated in the discussions, and I sat down with the employees during lunch break or whatever time slot there was and talked about the series of questions that I'm gonna be telling you. And that was 6 focus groups involving almost 40 people. So in total, we had about 109 people that participated in different groups, and the idea is to just cross-pollinate these conversations, so ideas that bounce from one person to the other, and at the end it's like a rich conversation that involves several topics of discussion. What we talked about was about roles and motivation, work environment, teamwork, what does it mean for them, what are the challenges, what are the facilitators around communication, support needs, and finally we kind of wrap all of that up as in the resources needed. What do you need to make your lives easier, your work easier? So the data, the way that we analyze this type of data is different, but there is a methodology to it. So the first thing that we do is that we transcribe all of those conversations. Those were about an hour long, an hour and a half conversations. Sometimes people would get too excited and I get very excited. So we would go a little bit overboard, but between coffee and donuts and food, we just talk, basically. We transcribe all of those recordings. Those were in Spanish and in English, and we just write them down. And then we start familiarizing with all the content and reading all of these focus group discussions and start highlighting what is interesting, what are the interpretations for that, identifying, we follow that with identifying, listing, and clustering in topics, and then we develop codings. So we do a coding process from the data, and we kind of categorize that and classify that in different themes. And we use a software for that as well. In our case, we used Vivo, but yeah, it has a software. It's like an enhanced reading tool that you can easily follow through the methodology. And these were hours really of conversations and brainstorming. We sat down for several sessions to really immerse in what people is saying. And it's not a summary of what people said. That's very easy to do, that you can ask ChatGPT to do it. It's more of an interpretation of what they really are saying, go through the layers of what it means behind, and drawing brainstorming maps, mind maps, however you want to call them, on different topics and how does that look like. So out of all of that, I'm just going to present 3 main topics that we kind of concluded that were the main topics. We call them themes, but I'm just going to call them topics. And this is very preliminary. Well, not super preliminary, but preliminary still. We're writing this paper up. But the first theme was around the farm, infrastructure, tools, and organization. And with that, it kind of further broke down in different topics: workforce structure, advisory services, equipment, tools, the use of data, the physical space around that infrastructure and farm. So more like the physical farm environment. The other topic that we concluded as one of the more important ones, of course, was the people side of things. All of those social interactions, work culture, leadership and training, comfort speaking up, motivation, trust, sense of purpose. Those were also some of the most highlights that we had. And the third topic was around animal outcomes and performance, being centered in health, well-being, and behavior of the cows. And I'm not going to go through all of those. I'm mostly going to focus on these seven topics: advisory services, leadership and training, comfort speaking up, motivation, and cow health and well-being and behavior. So if we dig into sort of the questions that we went through, one of the main questions, or the question that we would spend some time, was what parts of your job feel the most motivating to you? And people reflected. Remember that we had veterinarians and employees and dairy farm managers and owners. So they were not mixed, they were separate groups, but they all reflected, on that set of structure of the questions were similar to all, but they would speak obviously at their level. So when we would talk about what parts of your job feel most motivating, a lot of the people, for example, the farm managers and owners, would say milk production, just how productive we are. I'm pretty proud of having, 100 plus pounds of milk production. It's been an accomplishment, an amazing accomplishment, and we're very proud of that. Others would say health. We're so motivated when we have this. We've been winning all of these somatic cell count, low somatic cell count prizes, less than 50,000 awards that we've been winning. Our genetics are amazing. We're very proud of that. Others would say, how efficient we are. We're still operating. We're still making money, even though sometimes it gets more difficult. Some years are more difficult than others, but we're a profitable operation that we can keep up. And other people would reflect more on the team side of things, on how they were very proud of retention, tenure, being the employer of choice, especially right now. Many mention now that we don't have a wait list of people. We used to have a wait list, but still we have people that wants to work for us. We don't have to go finding for people, because people comes and wants to work for us. So we're very proud of that. And we have people that has been here for 30 years. We have people that we've seen their kids grow up, and everybody grow up, and have been there for 20, 15, 30 years. So we're very proud of that. And another type of comment as well, that people felt that it was very motivating for them as farm managers and owners, was the employee growth, seeing that growth, that professional and personal growth in their people, that stability, that thriving that they have. So with that, I want to kind of reflect on one of the comments that one of the farm managers said, that he mentioned, it's a point of pride for me that people on our farm feel secure in their jobs and able to build a better life, growing professionally, building families, feeling confident that they have what they need. Seeing that stability and growth is a huge thing for me. After that, he said something like, I just wish they would know how much I care, but I don't think they do, because I can't communicate that in Spanish. So just with that, I wanted to briefly show and reflect on what success means for different people and at different levels. But it was one of the main topics that we delved into. Now, as I mentioned, in this part, I just want to briefly kind of compare some of the motivators from farm managers. We mentioned high milk production, healthy cows, milk quality, somatic cell count, strong teams. From the employee side of things, some of the motivating factors that they mentioned was, of course, bonuses. We just really come for the money, and we just really need to get this check through. Healthy cows was one of the main motivators, seeing that we did a good job, that we're not, that we have low somatic cell count, that our mortality has dropped, or these things, these health issues we have done a lot better. You should see 10 years ago how we were doing, and now we're so much better with this. Recognition and empowerment and autonomy was also very motivating for them. They would recognize when and how they felt agency throughout the years, and how they've professionally growth, and how much the growing and learning opportunities meant for them, just being able to educate themselves, to train, they really appreciate all the training efforts that the farm has. Obviously, not all people is the same. That it may be a punishment for some to go to a training, but with this kind of research, we are usually going to have people that wants to participate in the research, and people that wants to participate in the research a lot of times is the people that are keeners. So in our group, we had a lot of people being very well motivated by growing opportunities and what that meant for them. As far as frustrations now, one of the main frustrations was, of course, the language barriers, relying on bilingual people, employee turnover. We train this person, they leave, we just switch, and we spent all this time. Some were very hands-off, as in I'm not doing training anymore. They just train amongst each other, but still there is a lot of resources, obviously, as we know, that go into training. So having that high employee turnover was very frustrating. Burnout, and then very few options for managers and HR. A lot of options for employee training, but few options for higher organizational structure wise. And from the side of employees, similarly, language barriers was a very frustrating part, relying on a bilingual person. A lot of people mentioned the bad apple or that toxic leadership being very frustrating for their day-to-day competition within the teams, and burnout of the employees, physical and mental, especially the first weeks of employment. So just to kind of reflect on what strong teams meant as motivators and weak teams meant as a frustration, I wanted to touch on the opposite question of what parts of your job feel the most motivating and the most draining. So in this part, the leadership structure felt as it was very difficult. Like positive leadership was determined as people that gives you support. So support meaning wanting the compañeros, wanting the colleagues, the team to be as good or better than you. Accountability, having people really owning their mistakes. That's very difficult to have, but that's what a good leader really is good at doing, like showing that you can make mistakes, own them, and how to fix them. And that builds also that part of the trust that they would be reflecting on. And inclusion, belonging, as far as making you feel that you're part of the team, that you're working towards a goal and that you're working for a good cause. That is really what positive leadership looks like in my view. And as far as the opposite, negative leadership, the bad apple came over and over again. Broken communication as well. What this broken communication meant, farther than a language barrier. Obviously, language barrier can be a broken communication issue, but farther than the language, just the chain of communication and how trust was sometimes lost, and how negative leadership structure would be reflected in things like Big Brother or the bad apple. And they would call Big Brother as in like very tight surveillance and just reprimand over and over, and how negative and frustrating that would be. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on was the bad apple. We call it the bad apple because it was a recurrent theme, a recurring topic, talked from the veterinarian side, from the farm manager side, from the employee side of things. Everybody kind of differently, but in a similar way, reflecting on the effect that toxic leadership or a bad apple can do, not necessarily leader, but even employees. What can that do to a team? And they would describe, they always had a story behind, 10 years ago we had this and this happening, but when that person left, then things changed. 15 years ago, and they would even reflect that the veterinary clinic sometimes as their own clinic as well. Sometimes we had this boss and this was really toxic, it was bad, and once they left, we had a whole different structure in our veterinary clinic. So that same was reflected throughout the different groups or across the different groups. And things like rivalry, negative talk, blame shifting, resistance to feedback. So that person, because I would be like, okay, describe what are you talking about? What did this bad apple do, and how did it affect your day to day, and how can we identify that? So that one person or people that would be usually cutting corners, tension following that person, avoidance, disrespectful, distrustful. The favoritism also was not appreciated at all. People would sometimes feel that family would just kind of favor family, and sometimes you would be waiting for a job and this would happen. And that was one of the main things that would be frustrating. And inaccurate translation was one of the main things. Sometimes the bad apple was like this bilingual person, and it was reflected on how that translation accuracy was very poor. And I think that all of us that speak English and Spanish, and the person doesn't know that we're bilingual, and they start translating whatever the farm manager said, and you're like, no, that's not exactly what was said. So they're translating a little inaccurate, and that is easy to notice and know, really. So this bad apple really a way to identify this person, to identify or people, the behavior. Who is this bad apple? Could it be you as well? So just to reflect on that, and as advisors to help identify that harmful dynamic early, and understanding why they're happening is one of the things that was reflected on. One of the advisors, one of the veterinarians said that they thought that one of the main roles for us, as we are more of a trusted source or a very good source of trust between the owner and it's a long relationship a lot of times, would be just bringing and lifting that person up that we knew that could have more potential, but sometimes the managers or herds people don't see it. So help identify harmful dynamics, but also help identify positive people and people with potential as well. So with that, also the conversation went into what does a good work environment look like, and I'll just give you a few minutes to maybe think uh, yourselves, think silently, what does that mean for you? What are the clinical signs? And that's kind of how we put it. What are the clinical signs that we look when a work environment is not positive? Is positive. Like, what does it seem like? What does it look like? What does it affect on? So some of the conversations around this, one factor that was very, very highly mentioned was the follow through. So having a positive work environment means a lot of times following through. I say something and I am listened, I am heard, and I feel visible to routine, and that it can be done through routine meetings. It's a sign of trust. Problems get addressed. I say from something as simple as the gate is broken, we need to repair it because it's affecting the whole cow flow and it's a disaster, to bigger issues. And using routine meetings for that was very much mentioned as one of the tools and drivers for having that follow through. Some of the things that people mention a lot was we only have meetings when we know that we messed up. Sometimes, like, it's just when they call us for a meeting, it's like, okay, what now? What did we do? So using that meeting in a structure that is for positive things and for just communication, bring things up, that's just a value that I feel like sometimes we underestimate, and that is difficult to do when we don't have a bilingual person on farm. And are we gonna pay a consultation fee to a veterinarian to translate that, or are we gonna? So it depends on farm to farm. But I understand that it's difficult when we don't have that bilingualism on farm that can facilitate this type of meetings. So we're gonna talk about that as well. Another positive sign of a work environment was people speaking up without fear, without blame, that psychological safety, we call it. And a lot of times that psychological safety being linked to physical safety. Do we feel safe in our jobs? Do we have masks? Do we have PPEs? Do we have protection towards different chemicals? Do we have ergonomic circumstances as well that can favor the way that physically we feel, and that connected to how we mentally feel about speaking up as well. Another positive work environment factor that was discussed was the condition and the upkeep of facilities. How housing is a whole, it was touched on, of course, it was discussed, but it's a whole topic in itself. And sometimes it was very positive, sometimes it was seen as negative, as in like we have to work together, live together, and these facilities, so think that it's a whole topic in itself, and I'm not going to touch on that. But as far as living and working conditions on farm, just upkeeping of the bathroom, of an area to have lunch or an area to sit, just 12-hour shifts with nowhere to eat, nowhere to use the bathroom, basically. So that was mentioned as a very good positive sign when farms cared about their facilities for employees. As far as cow health, that was also very interesting. We had discussions on how does a positive workplace environment translates into the cow health. Obviously, one of the main things, and the one that we can probably all think about, is somatic cell count, udder health, as well, and how that reflects on the milking parlor teams and the way that it translates from the people that chases cows or brings cows to the parlor, the bedding, the scraping, all of that, all the way to the parlor. And they were really very thoughtful about reflecting on how their work and their communication affected from the stall all the way to the machine, to the milking machine, and to somatic cell count. So that was one of the main things, of course, that a good work team reflected on a good cow health. As far as udder health, calf care, lameness, just being rushed, not communicating, pushing cows, not reporting, all of that, or reporting or not wanting to report on lame cows, things like that, was a reflection on workplace dynamics, a positive environment or a negative environment. And then the cow well-being, on the welfare side of things, just the condition of the tails, injection sites, injuries, behavior overall, all of that was related as really some cow welfare behavior signs related to positive workplace environment. And maybe it's easier to explain or to reflect on it on the negative side of things. People would mention that whenever the workplace environment was very negative, you would get to see broken tails. This is like a lot from the veterinarians: broken tails, injuries, and then like really bumps, injection sites, really hard, aggressive shots being put. People would not laugh. Something as simple as just laughing, smiling, saying hello, that in their minds were reflected. Gates, just shutting gates, that noise around the farm. Laughing with cows was also another thing that they mentioned, just enjoyment, kind of working with cows in a way. And how does that reflect? There was a story of an employee that whenever it was his turn to do the feeding during the weekend, on Mondays, people would really acknowledge how the milk production went high, and that it was different from the rest of the days, that what was happening and why. And he was like, well, because I'm feeding them and laughing with them, it's just a joy to work with them. And so it was just interesting to see different reflections on the welfare side of things as well. And then just to touch on the language barrier side of things, that was one, of course, of the main things discussed. And it was a barrier across all groups. So farm managers, really, they would talk about how difficult it was to communicate. None of us can speak. These are quotes from different farm managers and owners. Not being bilingual, that's the biggest struggle for me. None of us can speak Spanish, so the barrier is very complicated because none of us speak. So it's also a lot of it's through Google Translating, and it's very difficult to do that as well. I would love to learn English because the Hertz people would say that the Hertz manager would say, I would love to learn English because that is the only way of kind of going up the ladder, and it empowers you and you learn and you're able to kind of be better at your job, and people can see that. And from the employee side of things, they would reflect on how frustrating it would be to not speak the language. Just feeling dumb, sentirse tontito todo el tiempo. That would be like, feeling dumb all the time. I feel dumb all the time. I don't know how to communicate. I try to learn, and I would like to learn, but it's very difficult because we don't have the time, we don't have the resources. If the farm doesn't approve, we don't get access. We work 12 hours. So even though if I would like to learn and I know the benefits of learning, it's very difficult for me to actually do it. And I think that that was very well shared across all groups. There also has to be a desire to learn, of course, but the time constraints and how difficult it is to learn a new language when we're adults, it's a real challenge for sure. And from the veterinarian side of things, similarly, they would just reflect on how difficult it would be as part of their education when they're training to be veterinarians to learn a language, because it's so much that they couldn't really, but they acknowledge how important that would be and the different structure that that takes in their day-to-day job. Out of the 38 veterinarians that we had in the focus groups, only 4 spoke Spanish, and 3 of those were women. So it's not a lot of people is doing it, and even though a lot of them recognize how important it is, but they can get by show and tell, by having all the resources, writing it, things like that. So, but it's a real struggle. And with that, I want to touch on just how the conversations led into how bilingualism is really positive, but also how difficult it is for the bilingual person on farm to do all the duties, and that they really end up being like a bridge between management and employees. And they act as translators, as conflict resolution, the drama solver, the trainer, the cultural connector, the interpersonal mediator. So it is a complex role, and a fatigue is real as well for the bilingual people. And it was always mentioned, we just need more. Wish we could have more, right? As far as how to connect and bridge that language barrier, these are some of the tools that people mentioned and shared that they were using. So also during the focus groups, that was something positive. Like people would say, "Oh, you're using this, okay? Can you?" And they would exchange information as well, and they would learn from each other. And these are some of the tools that are being used. The main issue with this is how inaccurate they are, how they're not adapted to the dairy language itself or veterinarian language itself, and the delay in translating, and then connectivity issues and things like that. But it's definitely a tool that people is using. As far as courses and in-person training, a lot of people, mostly on the south of Wisconsin, is using extension resources to have people on farm. In the Green Bay area, not that much in the Green Bay area, and all over the north, and more private consultants are being really outsourced as Spanish-speaking intermediaries to train people. And there are different resources for that. Also, people during the focus group, we share information on training resources and who can attend this. But definitely some of the ways that language barriers are being bridged. And as the end too of the tools and practices that could help you, this question that we ask at the end, like what can help you better support your work dynamics and your culture, explaining the why behind the SOPs was one of the main things that was discussed. We can have all of these protocols translated, we can have everything translated, but it's the why that we struggle with, and it's the moment of doing it and how we do it, and it's just the common sense thing and the day-to-day. That's where we really struggle on training how to be a leader, autonomy, how to provide that agency, how can I leave the farm and go on vacation and be okay with that. So I feel like a lot of the struggles, large farms, like above 5,000 cows, would have an HR team and would have that very well kind of set up. But the smaller farms around the 1,000 or less than 1,500, something like that, would be big, but small, so that they wouldn't usually have like a dedicated person. So I feel like those were real struggle. Everybody really pointed out with challenges, but kind of like the mid-sized farm found very challenging to have that breaching as well. And as far as a couple of thoughts more on the monetary versus non-monetary incentives, this was very interesting as well because a lot of examples came from what motivates you, the incentive, the money, the $1 more. And they would reflect, for example, when the farm took that and they just gave and increased salaries all over throughout the employees, but that was just not the same. It didn't feel the same, for example. So it was to me interesting because I would be like, okay, but you're getting more money or even the same money or even more than what you were getting, even not attached to outcomes necessarily. So why is that negative? And then they would reflect on what does working for that incentive meant as a team. And they would be like, okay, it's just that on Mondays we were like, okay, team, like dele, 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 póngale, póngale, póngale. And we would work through the week and we would be just asking all the time, how are we doing? How was the somatic cell count? How was this? How was that? And it was just like very team building, like very fun to be working as a team towards the same goal. So that to me just reflects on incentive, monetary or not monetary incentives. It's like the importance of that activity, that teamwork activity, either that being soccer, the World Cup, food trucks, anniversaries, celebrations of small achievements and big achievements. So just that part of teamwork and how it connects them felt way more important than the dollar itself. But that was that varied among farms, across farms. Some of them would love incentives, some of them decided to go away from that. Then another takeaway too is like to create that environment that encourages speaking up and listening and using those meetings not to just go after what we messed up and what is wrong and what we can improve, but also using it for positive things that are happening and to communicate, just as a venue to communicate and to foster that psychological safety and have that safe space to speak up. And even if they don't, a lot of people after the meeting, they come and they really ask. And then the last thing here too is on how do we adapt to those communication differences, how we use how do we first acknowledge and the importance of having people working under the same environment, understanding their personalities. And this may sound too far away from what we do on our daily work, but just imagine how we structure our tasks differently, how we communicate differently, and we put all of these different personalities under the same room. If we don't acknowledge how we communicate, how our personalities are, if we are red, blue, yellow, green, the famous DISC human behavior wheel, if we don't understand how we are and how our personalities are, how can we understand how to work with other people, right? So that's one of the main things. You can't easily change your personality, but you can shift your behavior. And I really like that quote as well, not from a focus group participant, but it's a really, really good thing to really foster in our farms, employees and managers, everybody getting to know each other. And the use of technology as a communication tool. There are many technologies out there, and how do we use them to kind of troubleshoot something behind and something of what is happening rather than just reprimand on something that was wrong. Try to figure out and use these tools as well for follow through. That was mentioned as one of the strategies from farm managers and how they like to use these tools differently. And the small things as just providing, I said food trucks or things, just team activity buildings. Now that the World Cup is approaching, that's a very exciting time for people, for me included. Every 4 years is just my highlight. And this is a picture of a garden. It's not a cemetery, is a vegetable garden that the farm provides for their employees. And all of those wooden stacks are the employees' names, and it's just a garden vegetable. So to wrap that up, just got to think about how to bridge in and strategies to bridge that communication gap, and how the effectiveness of this communication happens when we see like a more broad view and a more comprehensive system view involving SOPs, meetings, routines, and how we merge that and combine that with growing our people, growing the ability, growing the agency, the autonomy of the people, and giving them opportunities as well. So that trust, that leadership, that relationship, and bridging that with the use of tools, translation tools, visual tools, all or advisory tools. So really those communication issues have to be seen as a overall. And as a take home to address toxic dynamics, final thoughts on how to bridge these issues that we commonly see on farm and can affect cow health and well-being. Gotta address those toxic dynamics early, that bad apple that I talk about. Address those early to prevent long-term harm, because it was very, very obvious how that really impacts everything else down the chain. The follow through really builds that trust and that safety to speak up, and how educational opportunities really fuel that personal and professional growth. And motivation doesn't have to be just monetary. So thinking about everything else really. And to kind of just bring this on the slide that I show, on this slide that I show on what remains unknown, this was the first step of a broader research plan, which was focus groups, listening, sit down with people, listening what they need, what are the challenges, what do they appreciate. And from that, what we are working on and currently developing is what comes after that. We are providing bilingual on-farm support to troubleshoot workplace dynamics challenges affecting cow health and welfare through the Dairyland Initiative here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the vet school. So kind of like a customized, I go on farm, I sit down, I troubleshoot the same way that I do it as a veterinarian to troubleshoot a lameness issue. We do that with workplace issues. And then we're working also on developing real-time bilingual communication and interaction tools to improve that daily operation. And that is part of like as what happened with the information that we collected during these focus groups. And as far as research, what comes next is to really better understand and to provide scientific evidence on how these interactions between workers, cows, and farm environments shape dairy systems, and also how to quantify that impact. How do we make these decisions on what from the human people element side of things is really affecting my bottom line, and how do we change this and it's affecting the cow health and well-being. So that's a step 2, and it's going to follow by step 3, which would be a longitudinal. But just to expand on this research that we're currently doing now, we're sending an online survey, and this is going to go in a few weeks. I know everybody's tired of surveys, myself included. I do not like them, so I don't blame anybody that doesn't like them, but it's kind of like the only way to collect a lot of the information. We're going to send a survey to all Wisconsin farmers on people management. It would take you about 20 minutes, and it's going to be about all things from salaries and employees, number of employees, things like that, because we need just this kind of information to know where we start. And what's in it for you would be a benchmark report at the end where we collect all this information so you can compare yourself with your neighbors in your region and across Wisconsin. That would be one of the steps, one of the first steps. And with that survey, if you want us to come to your farm to see and collect information at different levels, then we would be happy to do so. We're planning to visit 30 farms in Wisconsin, commercial farms, this summer. My students are coming this summer. They're bilingual as well. And the intent would be to go and collect information on different types of things, the environment and cow health and well-being and management as well. If you filled out the survey ahead of time, we don't even have to almost talk to you. It would take us about 4 hours on farm, but it's just our work being on farm collecting data. And that would be basically it. And this is to build on evidence to be able to go to the next steps of how do we plan these interventions, and what evidence do we have for how workplace dynamics affect cow health and well-being. And with that, I am now for real done. I'm sorry if I went a little bit over board, but feel free to email me with questions, with comments. I would love to hear opinions. If you want to participate in the upcoming research, we would really, really appreciate that too. If you need help, if you just have complaints, if you want to go to Costa Rica and want me to give you tips of where to go, I'm happy to do that too. So I'll thank you very much for joining, and I'll give that to you, Caro.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Solano. Very nice presentation. Many of the situations and conversations you mentioned, like I have experienced myself, and like how like it's so connected the people, right, with the cows, right? If people is unhappy, upset, maybe we'll have more welfare issues, right? So looking forward to your next part of the research where those connections are going to be more clear. If people have questions, they can put it on our chat. Also, I have a question for you since we have a couple of minutes. So you talk about the different motivations for people and understanding that every individual will have different motivators, right? So for some it's the money, for some it's the time off, for some are like very different motivators. Do you kind of check if the motivators were different by age? You know, like the different generations wanting different things?
Yeah. So that varied across the three groups. Oh, I'm gonna stereotype. That's a stereotype, really. But for example, older veterinarians would have a very different motivation than younger veterinarians, and that was very clear throughout. A lot of the older veterinarians a lot of the discussions was about our role as veterinarians in this part of workplace and human and people. Older veterinarians were more towards the line of thought of this is not what I signed up for kind of thing. Like it's part of, but I don't like the consulting side of things. I really like the health. Otherwise I would have not been a veterinarian. And that is a totally valid, obviously, way to go. Because most of us go to veterinary school because we like cows, not because we like people. So that was one of the things. But the younger people, and especially with the language barriers, had a different view because they would see how the role of the veterinarians is changing so much, and how the need of different skills is really what gets you through, and how very progressive farmers are the ones that are pushing the vets into going into different areas outside of our comfort veterinary skills to do that. But that was I wouldn't say by age necessarily, but there was a little bit more differences in that too, and female and male. And that's very similar also with the farm managers and owners. I think well, I couldn't say I don't have an example right now on that, but there were differences for sure as far as motivation. With the employees, for example, we would see a little bit more. I don't have scientific data to like say statistically significant, these and these, but my observations were a little different tenure people that has 10 years, 30 years, 20 years in the farm, the way that they would see and understand motivation and have gone through so much compared to the people that was there for 1 year. Regardless of the age of the person, it was more about the age and the tenure that they would have on the farm. And younger farm managers, there were several that also, it was more noticeable with the language. Younger farm managers and owners, some of them have gone through the whole process of learning the language because they realize that they cannot depend on Carolinas, and they cannot depend on Laura's, and they cannot depend on the bilingual advisor to get their farm going. So they've gone through a lot of efforts to speak and learn the language, but a lot of it too was just personality wise.
Yes, absolutely.
But
Understanding.
we'll have that data.
Coming soon. We'll invite you in the next year. And another, we don't have much time, but one quick question. You mentioned people complaining about like the big brother type of things. And then at the end, some people were, one of the tools they use are the cameras.
Yeah.
So like that kind of goes
Yeah. With the Big Brother, the examples that were provided, because everything that I talk about was from their end. Obviously, my interpretations, but it is from their end. So the Big Brother part was reflected on managers that would have cameras all over and would have, obviously, as a monitoring thing, but a little bit overboard and just like kind of like a little bit going after people and not trying to understand the context in a way, just more of the very a little bit of an aggressive management style. And when I talked about technology as in cameras, that cattle care, for example, that gives you all of the performance during milking and can assess employees, mistakes of employees and things like that. It was interesting to listen to people on how they're using those technologies. They would come in the morning, the herd manager would come in the morning and would have all of these alerts that Fulanito said this, did that, Maria did this wrong, and all of these reports. And before, they address the concerns, of course, but before they understand that there is something behind it, so they can have the data to start the conversation because they can literally see the data on what is happening employee-wise. But by having that conversation, they give the opportunity to the employee to explain what is happening. So some of the examples that they would put would be like, okay, this guy, I come in the morning and I see that he's using that towel in one cow and then he's switching it and using it in the other cow, and we're not supposed to do that. He knows that you are not supposed to do that. You have to use one towel per cow. And then when I ask, it's because the laundry, I was a little mad, of course, and I come and he's like, well, but it's the laundry machine is not working, and then the other guy didn't put the soap, and then so it was like a whole chain of things happening. So he had to go and fix the machines instead of reprimanding the employee. A little bit of understanding on that, so it can go both ways. And that, I guess, monitoring and technology and the Big Brother, it depends on how we use it, right? But the Big Brother was more of the negative side of things on reprehension.
Good. Laura, it's noon. So I want to say thank you so much for your presentation. I think, like, as you said, there is a direct relationship with people and cows and how they interact. So I love this talk. Thank you so much. If people have more questions, I think you
Yeah,
told
feel
us
free
your
to email
email,
me.
so that's good. They have them. And again, thank you so much. I'm going to tell everyone, please remember the Badger Dairy Insight meets on the third Tuesday of each month. And the next one is going to be June 16th. The name is Nuts and Bolts of Dairy Ventilation. Dr. Nestle Dennis and Mario Moncada will walk us through key ventilation considerations. Very special topic coming to summertime in Wisconsin. So for more information and unbiased research-based dairy resources, please visit the Extension Dairy Program at dairy.extension.wisc.edu or follow us on Facebook at Extension Agriculture. Again, thank you, Laura, for the presentation, and thank you, everyone, for being here with us today. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.